Hey everyone, David here, and I've got some exciting news to share. I've decided to write a book, and I've entitled it Psychosocial Hazards Are Real. The book is intended to help clarify the fact that psychological safety cannot be achieved without paying attention to the psychosocial hazards people are being exposed to. Despite how much individuals might be interested in treating others with kindness, dignity, and respect, many cultures are so full of psychosocial traps that no psychological health and safety effort can ultimately succeed. But to address psychosocial hazards, you first have to know what they are, and you have to have some idea what to do to address them. Though the book won't be 100% complete until the spring of 2025, I'd like to share a unique opportunity to reserve a copy during the book presale campaign. The campaign will run from September 16th to October 18th, 2024. This will be an opportunity to get one of the first copies of the book, tickets to the book launch event, and other opportunities to learn more about psychosocial hazards. For more information, you can go to my personal LinkedIn or Facebook page, or the LinkedIn, Facebook, or webpage for ID2 Solutions. Don't miss out on this unique opportunity. Now, back to this episode of the podcast. In our last episode, we talked with the documentary producer behind Honorable But Broken, an expose about the emergency medical service system in the United States. We'll explore the documentary further, but this time from the perspective of a photographer from his up-close and personal experience with emergency medical services providers. Up next on this episode of the Psych, Health, and Safety USA podcast. From Flourish DX, this is the Psych, Health, and Safety USA podcast. As workplace mental health has become a global priority, there's a greater focus on addressing psychosocial hazards. Each week, we look at psychological safety from an occupational health and safety perspective. Let's talk psychological health and safety. Welcome to this week's Psych, Health, and Safety USA podcast. I'm your host, Dr. I. David Daniels, and I want to thank you for tuning in. Each week, we seek to increase awareness of the importance of psychological health and safety by learning from the lived experiences, research, and expertise of our guests, as well as advocating strategies to reduce harm and minimize vulnerability to psychosocial hazards in the American workplace. So by the end of the 20th century, nearly 93% of the United States population was covered by some form of 911 service. 95% of that coverage is what's called enhanced 911, which can locate a caller within 300 meters. Despite the coverage of 911 nationwide, the response that communities receive when they call 911 varies dramatically across the country. Shockingly, most states don't mandate the provision of emergency medical service, so funding is unpredictable and in some cases very inadequate. There's a critical workforce shortage, particularly in rural areas, which has led to much longer response times. So the goal of the Honorable But Broken documentary was to raise awareness of the systemic collapse in some cases of the national emergency medical service system and to advocate for change. But even more impactful than the story about the system is a story about the individuals in the system, the EMTs, first responders, and paramedics in the field. So we're honored for this discussion about the documentary. We're following up to a previous conversation, but to have someone who was on the ground, in the field, with the folks who were experiencing this system. And so we're going to dive right into it with a question that the way I frame it anyway, is I want to get the introduction of my guest by my guest with this question. Who is Derek Hanley?
Derek Hanley. Well, that's me. Happy to be here. And, I have a background as a military medic. I served about 4 years active duty as a paramedic with the U.S. Air Force. I did a little bit of time as a civilian paramedic on the streets, upstate New York. And then I did about 5 years as a combat medic in the Army National Guard with the 42nd Infantry Division out of Troy, New York. And since then, I've been keeping my toe in it, teaching EMTs and helping out with research and things like that, more behind the scenes stuff. Because I'll be honest with you, David, I got burnt out doing the job. It's a tough job, and back when I was going through my training and whatnot, things like post traumatic stress and depression and anxiety weren't even brought up. I mean, it wasn't even mentioned. And so that's I understand your interest in this topic, because perhaps if I had had some of those psychological tools and things like that I've gained over the years of going to therapy and working with psychologists and things like that, maybe I would have had a little bit better or longer time in the field. And so that's why I definitely have tremendous amount of respect for anyone who does this job for, especially, it boggles my mind that folks can do this for 20 or 30 years, and still have a smile on their face and still have that compassion in their heart for their patients. Because that was one of the things that I was curious about when I went back out in the field with my camera, for the book Photos from the Front Lines. How do these folks still have the compassion? Because a lot of times when you see these medics who've been doing for 20 or 30 years, they have the kind of the gruff exterior and the very very on mission and to the point and stuff like that. But in pretty much every instance that I saw, when the going got tough and when someone needed that real heart to heart human connection, the compassion was still there down below. And I think that's probably one of the factors that keeps folks in the game as long as they do, is just that burning compassion to help others. And I think the other factor that I've noticed that keeps folks in the game is a sense of humor. Because you see so many horrible things and sad things and traumatic things, day in and day out. And a lot of times I've noticed when I was in those situations was, you kind of have an option of laugh or cry in those moments. And sometimes you don't have the choice. Sometimes the tears just come, or for me, more often it was when I was on my way home or after the shift was over and I had that space to be able to start to process everything that I had seen throughout the shift. A lot of times driving home, that's when the waterworks would start. But whenever we could, my partners and I would always try to find a joke or find something funny, or lighten the mood a little bit and diffuse some of that tension in the moment, a little bit of sense of humor. So those are some of the things I saw, at least initially, my impressions. And it's a testament to the human will and this and that to be able to A, start this job, but B, to be able to continue it as long as some folks do.
Yeah, that's actually an excellent answer to the question, because all of these experiences do make you who you are. As as exciting as some were, as traumatic as others were, they made you who you are today. Again, similar experience. And I was one of those guys that spent probably a little bit longer than I needed to in the fire rescue service. But it is wonderful to hear people who recognize what they've been exposed to, understand it enough to be able to deal with it, and have found ways to to turn some of that around into something else that is also benefiting not only themselves but others. So but before we get a little bit deeper into that discussion, another standard question I ask everyone: um, what does psychological health and safety mean to you?
To me, I think it means a lot of things, but I think to what I would like it to mean, what I would kind of envision it being, would be a holistic approach to, the health, especially of our first responders and things like that. I think the military has done pretty well about recognizing the impact that traumatic exposures and, the difficult situations that soldiers and those folks have to be faced with. And I think they've kind of taken stock and implemented some things to try to be countermeasures to some of the things that military folks have to do. And of course, there's the VA system, and there's all sorts of things once folks get out, to be able to continue to help them with along the healing journey and things like that. And so in Photos from the Front Lines, I use military vernacular very intentionally to try to tie these two professions together in people's minds of military and medic, because other than a soldier who's in combat, first responders have as many, if not more, traumatic exposures than your average soldier. I mean, especially now that we're in peacetime, someone can go through their whole enlistment as a soldier without seeing combat or seeing much more than an office. A lot of folks just serve in an office, and I get thanked for my service when I tell folks that I was in the Army or in the Air Force, and that feels good. But then I tell them I was a paramedic, and they go, "Oh, you drove an ambulance," and it's like you have no idea the amount of pressure and stress that someone has to do when they're dealing with a crashing patient by themselves in the back of a moving vehicle with limited resources, limited light, limited space. I mean, I could talk about that. I could show you videos or photos, but you can't understand that pressure unless you've been the one who's in that situation. And so, that being the case, I think for me, psychological health and safety should be a proactive enterprise. I think a lot of the problem now is that so much of the psychological support for first responders and whatnot is reactive. They wait until they're at that meltdown phase when they have to go and try and put together the pieces of this kind of broken the psyche. Whereas if we had just implemented a few things prior to this point, maybe we could have prevented this meltdown from happening and extended the longevity of the career for this person. Because average burnout rate for a paramedic is 5 years or so, and that's not good. I mean, we need folks, any most other industries, you have folks who do the job 10, 20, 30 years, and they're the ones who are then training the new breed and passing on the lessons that they've learned, and how to cope with a lot of the things that they have to see and things like that. And there isn't that. A lot of these folks aren't staying in there long enough to be able to do this. So, to me, I would like to, my vision for the future in this vein would be to see a lot more proactive steps taking place. I've seen, I talked to, I was doing some video work with the Campbell Police Department in Silicon Valley, and they're talking about how they have, a couple of therapists on staff, and not in a way to try and weed people out or things like that, but to work with them and hey, I know you guys just got back from a bad call. Let's sit down. Let's talk it out. They can follow up in a couple of days or a week and things like that. So to me, if I'm starting a fire service or an ambulance company or something like that, part of one of the line items on the budget, non-negotiable, should be mental health support staff that are there in house. Because I would love to see because crews rotate in from an ambulance over several hours. They deploy at different hours and whatnot. That so it'd be great to have someone on staff at the ambulance station so that crews come in. Hey, come on in. You have your half hour paid debrief. With the therapist. Let's talk over what you saw today. Try not to bring that stuff home to the family. Because a lot of times as first responders we do that, and that's kind of the analogy I'd use with my students. Is that it's almost like having a backpack with a shelf. And that compartmentalization of we had that bad call, so we put it in a jar, we put it on the shelf, and we keep doing that, and all of a sudden it starts to weigh us down and weigh us down. And going to therapy is almost just taking a jar off the shelf, opening it up, and dumping some of that weight out as you're processing with your therapist, and suddenly we can start to lighten our load, so we can prevent that jar from going on the shelf in the first place. That might be a good start. And then if we could have psychologists who are available daily for walk-ins. Someone's having a bad day. Hey, just stop by the station. We got, you can, wait for half an hour and you stop in and get a session. And then other ones who are, you have monthly check-ins with your, just scheduled appointments. Not like it's weird. Like, why is he going to the therapist? Like, no, it's the monthly appointment. You have to go. Like, what are you doing? You didn't go to your monthly appointment? Like, you're carrying all this stuff on you? Like, that should be the stigma of like, you didn't go see a therapist? That's weird. Like, you should see the therapist.
Yes, that's exactly right. You caused me to think a little bit about. So I came up in the Seattle King County Medic One system with the Seattle Fire Department, and some of the original paramedic classes had an 80% divorce rate, literally, and it was kind of accepted. That's just kind of the way it was. And if you so I heard you heard you mention how wouldn't it be nice if people looked at you kind of odd when you didn't go to the therapist, when in most cases it's just the reverse. We again the same there are systems across this country who have taken 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25-year olds, people whose generally their brains aren't even fully developed yet. They've placed them in the back of an ambulance. They've given them the life and death responsibility, given them access to pharmaceuticals, and then what that we wonder why the number one reason that a firefighter or a paramedic will die is likely death by suicide, because they that that shelf has been filled with so many things of their own, let alone the things that they're exposed to with the general public. And it's as if they're just supposed to deal with it. And here's where this becomes really important for the jurisdiction or the company that hired those people. Just like if you're gonna expose people to a physical hazard, OSHA says you have the responsibility to create a safe and healthful work environment for them. So, what about these psychological things that you know they're going to be exposed to? You know it, and they may not know it, but they should know you are going to be exposed to all kinds of things emotionally. Some folks are going to live. A lot of folks are going to die. There will be people, even again, people even close to you are going to have all kinds of issues. And so here are the systems that we have. Wouldn't it be nice if that's the way it was? And frankly, that is what's going on in Australia right now. That's what's going on in Canada right now. That's what's going on in the UK. That's what's going on in, you know, countries all around the world. And a part of the conversations I'm having with people is, why isn't that going on here? Why why is it that we wait, again to your point, until people are broken and in some cases irreparably broken, and then we get interested in dealing with the challenges that we expose them to? And again, even as a taxpayer, I think we ought to be more concerned about that.
100%.
Yeah. So oh boy. Uh so you've written two books, from the front lines and behind the skirmish line. And so tell me a little bit about the books. We're going to get to the documentary here in just a second, but at least what I think you've done is connected your experience in the military and your experience in paramedicine, and kind of connected at least I think that's what you've done. But tell me, how do those two books kind of go together?
Sure. So, I talked about my background as a medic and things like that. But one of the things that brought me out to California was a friend was starting a photography and video production business and wanted a partner to help kind of get it off the ground and get things going. So that was the real reason I came out to California. And so I worked with him for a little while, and we did some great projects. Worked on a awesome independent film on the nation of Tonga, and professional athletes and CEOs and corporate stuff, and kind of learned the ropes of how to, in other words, make something look badass. That's kind of the essence of our business was, you got something cool, we'll make it look badass. And so learning that kind of commercial production skills was great. And I sold off my share of the business and started my own organization. And like I said, always kept my toe in the waters of EMS and first responders. And then in January 2020, I got a job behind the scenes research with Alameda County EMS in the Bay Area, where Oakland and the East Bay, California is. So, as you know, March 2020, the pandemic struck, lockdown, and my job essentially at that point became a work from home position. But I'd been going out with crews just prior to that point because I've worked as a medic in Texas and in New York, but I never worked in the system in the Bay Area. So I kind of wanted to see what's a day in the life of the medics here, because each area each service area is very different. Oakland's way different from San Francisco, which is different from New York City, and so each one has its challenges and its interesting things. So I wanted to get out there, and then while I was out there, I was like, well, why don't you bring your camera with you? You have all this production skills. Like, let's see if we can capture some interesting stuff while out there. And most of it, David, was just to give to the crews themselves, because most folks don't know what a paramedic does on a daily basis. The first thing that comes to mind is people, you drive an ambulance, but you don't realize you're rendering emergency room level treatments, as a practitioner and things like that. So I thought it'd be cool just to have, so they can show, hey, look what daddy does, look what mommy does, every day. And, we're actually heroes, and we're pretty cool and stuff like that. So it's mostly just to give to the crews, to give themselves a little bit of recognition. But once the pandemic struck, I knew all these folks who I'd come to know, and I knew that were out there were actually, they couldn't work from home like I could. Paramedics, they were on the front line of the pandemic. I mean, there's no buffer. You're walking into people's homes who've been coughing and hacking and this and that for days, and everyone's sick, and all you have is your cloth mask or your little paper mask or something like that, especially at the beginning when PPE was extremely limited. So I really felt compelled to go back out there with my camera to tell these stories of heroism and bravery that were happening, because no one else would, because it's very dangerous. I mean, it's, you're taking your life in your hands every time you get out there in the field with any patient, because it's an invisible enemy. You can't see the threat. And, to me, I wasn't so much concerned that I was going to get sick. I mean, of course I was, but the real fear for me, and I talked about my wife in this type of thing before I even went out there, was getting her sick, or getting our friends sick, or getting their kids. Like it's one thing to, like I said, the battlefront. Battlefront. This is a unique battlefront in that, when you're going out to combat, you could get injured, you could get killed. That's one thing, but to get your family or your closest friends injured or killed, like that's a whole nother ever ballooning weight of uncertainty and stress that these medics were feeling. So just knowing that these folks were going out there every day in and day out, I wanted to capture that, and I wanted to tell their story to the world, because I think it's important to know what these folks did and what they had to go through, so that they can be recognized and honored for this. Because I think that's one of the big things that's missing here, David, is honor. We honor our military because we understand the sacrifices that they have to do and the things they have to see. But for some reason, there's a big disconnect in between how we honor the military and how we honor our first responders and our medics. And that was kind of the purpose of the book, was to increase that the visibility of what these folks do, in order to increase empathy and honor in society for them. Because if you honor something, you want to take care of it, and you want to make sure that it has a long life, and it's able to have a family and be happy and do all these things. So that was really the genesis of the book. And once I got out there, my first book, Behind the Skirmish Line, I was out with the tactical EMS team, and we were behind police lines the night of the major George Floyd protest in downtown Oakland. And while I may have agreed with a lot of the things that they were talking about, it was probably the most in fear of my life that I've ever been, was being on the other side of things, because there was 200 cops and first responders, and probably 7,500 protesters and demonstrators. And a lot of things too were there are agitators, and there are people who weren't even associated with the protest, who were throwing Molotov cocktails and bottles and bricks and things like that. And so when I got home that night, after experiencing that and saw some of the photos I got, I was like, I have to do something with this. Like, it would be a shame to let this material just sit on my hard drive and rot. So I kind of came up with the idea to put out a little bit of a book, to be able to publish these things. And then I kept kind of collecting material over that year as the pandemic unfolded. And then by the end of it, I was like, this is a whole collection that needs to be published. And so I started a publishing arm of my business and put out 2 books.
Wow. Yeah, it's interesting how organic all of that happened. Where you started off really just trying to do something to help others.
Do you need more psych health and safety in your life? Then head over to the Flourish DX Academy for several free on-demand e-learning courses. If you're an internal professional, follow Flourish DX on Eventbrite to register for any of our free fortnightly interactive webinars. Our flagship professional practice program is also exclusively available for internal professionals. The 12-week course blends theory, applied practice, and interaction with other professionals through live lectures and a monthly community of practice session. Find out more about all these learning opportunities, or inquire about a bespoke in-house training at the Flourish DX Academy. www.45003.org. Now back to this episode.
So I'm curious. There were, I'm trying to think of exactly what I was doing at the time, and it wasn't certainly out in the field. I think I was working for some folks that weren't in near the kind of hazardous situations that you were in at the time. But when did it really strike you how hazardous what you were doing was? Is there something that happened or some incident that occurred that made you really realize, wow, oh my goodness, this is pretty bad?
I think it was that night of the protest. That was one of them. And it was ironic to me in that, just in photos from the front lines, you can see the month before all this went down, there's appreciation parades, and there's folks hanging signs out and saying, thank you and stuff like that. So this immediate switch from you guys are heroes to we want to throw bottles and bricks and stuff at you was just an interesting juxtaposition and a dichotomy to me that was confusing. And I actually didn't go back out in the field for another month or two after that point because I was just like why am I doing, like, the public doesn't care, they don't understand, like it was the cops in in wherever it was, Missouri, or that wasn't the Oakland cops. Like, have you seen the diversity of Oakland police force? Like, half these guys you're throwing bottles at are black or brown, and women, and like, these weren't the folks who did it. Like, so it was a little troubling to me. And again, I understand why they were there, but I think that the methods weren't the best to achieve the goals that they were trying to. And I think whenever you're resorting to violence, it's always going to kind of cancel out whatever message you're trying to send in the first place. So that was one of them, but also it was just seeing the kind of huge sea change that came about. I mean, the cover of the book has, you can see, you know, we have an outbreak tent in the ambulance bay where the ambulance is normally backing up. You have nurses in spacesuits checking patients out, in the bay itself. You got full PPE. I mean, all this came about within a month or two of the pandemic striking. And, this is stuff you see in movies and like Outbreak and stuff like that, like setting up tents and spacesuits. Like, this doesn't normally happen in reality. So just seeing that and seeing the death toll as it started to mount, I mean, so many things were just crazy. But then on top of that, you also have the what I'll call, in quotes, routine trauma that's still happening. There's still the gunshot patients, and kids being hurt, and all the bad things that still happen, that these folks are dealing with, on top of the pandemic and the risk to themselves and their families, and all this stuff. So it's hard to put a finger on exactly one thing, because there was so much stuff swirling throughout this time, that I think it was almost good to have the photos to be able to kind of make sense of it after the fact, because when you're in the middle of it all, it can be like overwhelming to what you're observing. So I think that's another thing I think that's helpful in the book too, is it's for folks who were out there. It can give them a sense of understanding for that time period. And another big section I have in the book is the appreciation parades. I took a lot of photos of, because most of the medics couldn't attend the appreciation parades because they were out helping folks, who were calling 911. So I was honored to be able to be part of that, to be able to document it for those folks. And I have a lot of shots of, because we would drive around the local hospitals, and the whole hospital would clear out, and it'd be as far as the eye could see down the sidewalk. I have people waving and yeah, and thumbs up, and we're waving back at them, because we understood, people in the hospital were the one step back from the front lines. And that's where all the sick people congregate, and that's incredibly dangerous. And you're wearing masks for 12 hours a day, and so we understood their sacrifice and service. They understood our service and sacrifice. So we were out there. So I got a lot of shots of the folks who were just waving and giving thumbs up. And someone was talking about, well, you could have cut some of that out and edited it down, but I didn't want to, because I wanted the folks who were actually out there, who were the boots on the ground, to be able to receive some of that gratitude that was being given that maybe they didn't get at the time.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting kind of aspect of, again, the collective trauma that we all went through, is how important it was at the time to get some kind of uh, positive reinforcement, or acknowledgement for what folks were doing. Because again, to the points that you made, is I found it really interesting as a country how we went from quote unquote normal to all of a sudden there's those people on the front line and they're all essential workers. And then as things got better, we kind of drifted in some ways back to the way it was before. We kind of forgot about, and the way I describe the emergency medical service system, as I call it, the pre-hospital healthcare system, because that's what it is. For some people, it is their healthcare system. If there wasn't an EMT or a paramedic or a first responder, or an ambulance driver, somewhere in folks' community, they would have no healthcare at all, because our physical healthcare system leaves a lot to be desired. There's a lot of communities, and I live in one right now, that it is actually quicker for me, if I get sick, to get in the car and drive to the hospital rather than to wait for someone to come and take care of me. And, so again, this is one of those issues that's been around kind of forever. And even post pandemic, I'm not convinced we've solved it. I think we gave it as a country a lot of lip service, and again, it was a big deal while, thousands of people were dying every day. But in many ways, we've kind of drifted back to, somebody else will take care of it. It'll be all right someday. But in the midst of all of that, there are human beings who we've asked to make these sacrifices, that we've asked to be exposed to God knows what at any time, that we have underpaid, overworked, and underappreciated. And there are thousands of them across this country. And what you've done in terms of documenting their experience, in some cases, might help, both the general public, elected and appointed officials, kind of understand what's really going on. What have you really asked these folks to do? And what have you asked them to be exposed to? So how'd you get involved in the Honored but Broken documentary? How did all that come to happen?
Yeah. So, I've been trying to, like I mentioned, trying to post my stuff and get it out there and get people to see it and start to understand and whatnot. And the director, Brian E. Joby, came across some of my photos that were out there. And she got in contact with me and said, "Hey, I'm working on this documentary. It's about EMS and this and that." And so I was interested and whatnot. And when she told me that she had 3 children who were all EMS providers, that was that got me the thumbs up, because it's like, you understand. You're not just some auteur trying to make a film and pump their own thing or whatever. Like, she's doing this because she understands. She's seen behind the curtain, and hears the stories firsthand from the people who are out there. And so she reached out. She said, "Hey, I like your photos. Love to put some of those in there because my stuff's not staged. It's not overproduced. It's the real stuff. It's the real providers." And that's, if you look at photos from the front lines, there isn't. I tried to shy away from the gory things and the shock value things, which a lot of people kind of gravitate towards because that sells copies. If it bleeds, it leads and stuff. So, but to me, if you look at the photos, most of them are focused on the providers and their kind of mental state and their the emotions that they're experiencing as they're working these critical events and things like that. And to me, that was the important part. And so she wanted, some representation of real medics who are out there and doing the thing and had in the film. And so I said, of course, I'd be honored. And so they ended up putting about 4 dozen of my photos throughout the film as B-roll for things going over. And really amazing. And, I'm sure Brian will talk about it, but then they got, Sarah Jessica Parker to come in as a narrator to help to, hopefully get this to the national stage, which is where I think it needs to be. I mean, I think a lot of the folks who have seen the film and liked it have been within the community. So you're kind of preaching to the choir. Like, they understand the challenges and the funding issues and the lack of respect and things like that. But it's the taxpayers, it's the ones who when they call 911, they're not going to realize that it could be 5 to 10 minutes before you're even on the phone with a live dispatcher to start the wheels turning towards you. B, who's staffing that ambulance? Is it a first responder? Is it a paramedic? Is it an EMT? How long is that going to take to get to us? How well staffed is this system? Like you're mentioning, the rural areas, like, God forbid you get hurt when you're camping. You may be in a city and think that you're good to go, but you leave the city limits. Now all of a sudden you're in a totally different service area. It could be an hour or 2 before an ambulance even gets to you. And then there's impaction at the hospital itself, because they're short of doctors and nurses and everything in there, because they're getting burnt out, having been overworked, and the lemon's been squeezed until there's hardly any juice left. And so now you're waiting outside the ER for an hour before you can even get in to be triaged. And people don't realize this, and unfortunately, it's going to be to the point where they're not going to realize it until they try to call 911 because their family member or one of their friends has been injured or has a time-dependent illness, until they go, what? I had no idea. Like, what's going on here? And then, so we're trying to we're trying to prevent that from happening by getting the word out. Again, trying to be proactive, to let folks know that there is this crisis that's not in the future, it's now. And one of the things, David, that really made my jaw drop was I was talking to the CEO of the National Registry, Bill Seifarth. He was talking about, because they have the raw data. I mean, they're the NREMT. They know exactly what's happening. And when he mentioned that 25% of the EMS workforce has left since the pandemic, that's what made my jaw drop, because it's like that means the car's off the cliff. Like there's no more time to hit the brakes. It's off the cliff, because there's no way, even running at full capacity, that every EMT and paramedic school could possibly refill that amount of workers that it's lost in this short amount of time. And you can see it. I could see it when I was with Alameda County. I wasn't in the field, but you can watch what's happening. The guys get burnt out. They're starting to leave. Then that creates added stress and pressure on the folks who are still there, because now they're having to do more with less, which means things like mandatory overtime, increased shifts, less downtime to be able to diffuse from all this horrible stuff that you have to see, which then increases the burnout rate. And it's this you can watch the negative spiral happening in real time. And it's shocking to me that more things aren't being done to intervene to prevent this from happening. And that's one of the reasons that gets me up to want to talk about this stuff and help promote the film and the book and stuff, is that I would lose my mind if my wife had some sort of time dependent illness and I called for an ambulance and it took him an hour to get there. I'd lose my mind. And if something bad happened as a result of that to her, whew. So I'm afraid it may take something like a celebrity or an elected official or someone like that to lose someone or have something bad happen because an ambulance wasn't able to get there in time for the world to go, oh my God, what's going on here? I was like, well, we've been trying to tell you for months and months, folks. So maybe you should try opening your ears and listening.
Yeah, I think, again, to an important point you're making, Derek, it is, there are a lot of misconceptions about the systems that we've created. And people see the movies, they see the TV shows, and if they've never had to access the system, they have no idea. I have a story here, in the Atlanta area. This is many, many years ago, but I was out doing it was a walk run, kind of charity event in my, fire chief garb, my turnout gear. And the goal was to walk like 3 miles or something like that, and walk in my turnout gear. And in the midst of the incident, someone, waves me down, and I forget the medical emergency that a person was having. And so as I go to try to assist the person, I take my cell phone out, I call 911, and I'm placed on hold. And I had never called 911 before myself. I'd been, 20 years on the responder side, but I didn't realize that the system at the time, and sad to say, I'm not sure if it's really gotten much better, but hopefully it has. It actually put me on hold. So it put me on hold and then transferred the call a bunch of times. And these are things that communities sometimes don't recognize. And it's not only that, it is what's going on emotionally for everybody involved, for the person who's injured, for the person who called, for the dispatcher who knows that it took too long, for the EMTs going, well, wow, we just got this call. There is a psychological impact on everybody in the system if the system itself is, first of all, not understood by everybody. And a lot of this could be eliminated by simply being honest about what the system is. And don't tell people. There are a lot of cities and towns and counties out there talking about, oh yeah, we have a 4 or 5 minute response time, and they don't. It is not true. What you do is you throw out all the all of the real examples and leave the ones in that support that, rather than being honest with people and telling them, look, we don't have a 4 or 5 minute system. We have a 7 or 8 minute system. But also, here are the things that you can do before we get there. And just be honest with people. Same thing with paramedics and EMTs and firefighters. Tell people this is what this is going to be like. These are the things you're going to be exposed to. And here's how we're going to help you. But there's some things that you're going to have to do yourself. And just being honest with everybody who's in this system. I think that lack of honesty about what it really is creates a lot of the psychological challenges that people have because they're told a fairy tale. Oh, it's going to be wonderful. You're going to get paid a lot of money. You're going to be a hero. Yeah, but there's the other part of it that is not all that glamorous, and I think folks need to have both sides of the conversation. I really do. I was going to ask you. So and you mentioned it just a little bit, but I wonder if as we're starting to get kind of close to wrapping up, but how did this activity, this being out there in the field with these folks, it, did you find ways that it was helping you at the same time? That just being a part of this, based on your previous experience as a medic.
I think it was a little bit of both. I think like I was saying, it does kind of, I think having the photography and having that little bit of distance too, that because I wasn't responsible for patient care. I was there more as an observer and things like that. I did have to actually lay my camera down and help a couple times because I'm still, technically a paramedic. But heaven forbid if I'm the one you're calling, because it's been a while since I've been in the field. But I did have to, lay my hands down a couple times and help out. And I think as far as processing the whole year and everything that happened, I think it was good in that respect. But I'll be honest, David, it was still hard for me. That's one of the things that really struck me too was, I've been 20 years or so, doing this stuff, talking about it, this and that. But it's still, a lot of this stuff still struck me to the core, and further reinforced my desire to want to produce this material because, it's still cutting deep into me. When I have I've been in therapy for years and I have all these new tools and, stuff like that, but it's still, I mean, there's one we were on a shooting in Oakland and we were very close to where it actually happened. Coincidentally, we weren't even supposed to be in Oakland that day, but we got, because the system's short staffed, so we got transferred up there because that's obviously the busy portion of the county. And when we were getting there, police and fire were still arriving, and I took a couple shots on the way in because you could see the blood trail of the person. They were basically trying to get back to their apartment, and it wasn't like, oh, there's a drop and there's a drop. It was like spurt, spurt, and as medics in your mind, you're calculating blood loss in your head and go, ooh, this is not good. This is really not good. And I actually didn't take any photos of this incident because of my journalistic integrity. It didn't feel right. I mean, the family was there. The people from the apartment complex were there watching, and I didn't feel right, being there snapping photos, even though it was very compelling. And the medics were working their ass off to try and save this guy, and this and that. But the thing that got me was the wife was present, and just hearing her screaming his name, saying, "Wake up, wake up, wake up." That to me was like, sorry. It still gets me even just talking about it. Every time I talk about it, it's still there. And, I went home that night and I think in the shower or something is when it just kind of hit me and the waterworks started flowing again. It was just like this poor woman. I can't imagine, my wife, seeing me come through the door, bleeding out and seeing them try to do CPR. And, it's a very undignified, resuscitation is a very undignified procedure. And it's hard enough to watch as a provider, but to have it be your family member is just, I can't imagine. And so it's the little things like that stick with you. Someone calling out or a smell or things like that are hard to articulate, hard to even capture on film and things like that. But those are the things that stay with you and then will till I die. And, it's the same thing for everyone out there. And you can't unsee these things. You can't forget. Believe me, I've tried every way I can to try and forget this stuff, but it's still burned on that CD that plays up there. And so, so I think just as for me myself, it was a reaffirmation about how hard this job is and how resilient you need to be in order to be able to face this stuff and still be able to focus on patient care. Because that's, bottom line, that's what you need to do. You need to be able to do what you need to save the life, regardless of what emotional impact the surroundings and the situation, the scene may be having on you. And so to be able to, at least from my perspective, show a little bit of what's happening with these folks, and hopefully to get some of the public to understand, then my mission is complete. And that same thing with the film. A lot of people are out there trying to do this, but I'll be honest, David. I've seen a lot of news articles about the EMS shortage, and so it's not like it hasn't been completely uncovered. It's just the public is not waking up and taking notice as far as what's actually happening, even though people are trying to tell them. And unfortunately, it's I think it's just a side effect of especially American culture. People don't care unless it's directly affecting them in some way. And I guess that's what I'm saying. That they're not going to realize it's affecting them until they try to call 911, and then it may be too late.
Yeah, that's something that folks don't think about it, but there is not a single solitary one of us that gets out of here alive. We are all going to to need some type of medical care at some point in our life. Period. It happens to everybody. Period. End of story. And it can happen anywhere. It can happen at school, at work, on the street, on the sidewalk, out recreating. It can happen anywhere. And it is again, I think it is important that we just be aware. I mean, I again, to your point about not carrying this around, it doesn't necessarily have to be filling the backpack up, but I think sometimes we're, as a society, too oblivious to the reality. It is a reality that everyone needs to pay at least a little bit of attention to, because it's coming to you. It's not an if. This is what I talk to my colleagues in the fire rescue community. Uh, you may never have a fire in your house ever, but you're going to get sick eventually. Period. It's 100% certainty that something in your body is going to stop working, or working the way it should at some point. 100%. So it's like they talk about in the NFL that there's a 100% injury rate. So, but it's going to happen to all of us. So it's the one part of what communities do to help. I can't think of anything else that a community does that's more important, to be quite honest, because dead people don't pay taxes. They don't. And you people don't just we aren't at the point to where we can beam people to the hospital. So somebody has to get them there. Somebody has to provide this service. And and again, um, I want to repeat what you've heard to others. Thank you for your service, both to our country and our communities in both these ways, because it's important, and it's a necessary thing. And thankfully, you've taken time out of your life to do that, and are now trying to help people see it through a different lens. So if folks are really, they want to know more about your books, and to have more conversation with you, what's the best way to catch up with Derek and get one of the books, and how would people do that?
Yes, thank you, David. And I also want to mention too that I started a hashtag called Thank Medics for their service, because I think that we have someone tells you you're a veteran, they say thank you for your service, and that phrase is loaded with honor, and it's loaded with an understanding of, I understand what you've done, and I thank you for it. I didn't do it, but the least I could do is thank you for it. And so I think if we can people thinking along the same lines of, let's thank medics for their service, because you want to talk about some of the things they see, firefighters, dispatchers, police officers, I mean, everyone, all down the line. But I think medics are probably lagging behind a little bit in the honor category. I think fire and police kind of they've been around a little bit longer, and they kind of have um, instilled in the public their value. And the public recognizes it and honors them somewhat more for that. So I think we can start thanking medics for their service. I think that's one step. It's lip service still, but it's at least one step in the public honoring them for their service and sacrifice. But if you want to get a hold of me, you want to take a look at my book, you go to my website, dope.net, DOHP.net. You can see some of my photography. You can see my books are available there, some of the videos I've worked on. You can get in contact with me through my website.
Absolutely. Derek, thank you very much for for sharing not only the story but your story, and sharing a little bit about your experiences, and how you've been able to, again, help bring light to something that's going on, again, in every community in this country, and in many places around the world. I guess the reality is, in some places around the world, it's not going on because they don't have the system at all. So we are blessed to have the system that we have, but it could be better. It really could be. And I think one of the areas that makes it better is, again, back to an earlier point that you made, is when we think proactively about the human beings that we're asking to do this work. and look for ways to, to balance the workload and to make sure that people are given the rest and the breaks that they need and the support that they need for doing things that are absolutely necessary in every community in this country. So again, thank you so much for your time. And if you're watching or listening to this podcast for the first time, welcome. I hope that something you've heard will bring you back soon. Previous episodes of this podcast can be found at psychhealthandsafetyusa.com. You can watch, like, subscribe, and share the podcast on the Flourish DX YouTube page. And please do. We want others to find out what we're doing. Please do join the Psych Health and Safety USA movement by connecting to us and become a subscriber on LinkedIn. So until next time, stay tuned and look out for the next episode of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. Tune in each week for new episodes of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. If you have a story or know of one that needs to be told, reach out to us on LinkedIn or send an email to david@id2-solutions.com or go to the Flourish DX website at flourishdx.com. We'll see you next time.